You almost didn't watch this. Not because the title didn't catch you, it did. But there was a moment, maybe half a second, maybe longer, where something inside you hesitated, where a quiet voice said, "You've heard this before. You know how this goes." Someone lists the signs, you recognize yourself in a few of them, you feel good for an hour, and nothing changes. That voice wasn't wrong to be cautious, because that is exactly how most of this content works. And if that's what this were, the caution would be correct. You'd be right to skip it. But here's what that voice doesn't know. The signs most people talk about: the discipline, the early mornings, the positive attitude, the goal setting, the networking, the hustle, those are not signs of someone on the path to wealth. Those are signs of someone performing what they believe a wealthy person looks like. And there is a difference between those two things so fundamental, so structurally important, that confusing them has cost an entire generation of capable, motivated, genuinely driven people years they cannot get back. The real signs are quieter, more uncomfortable, less photogenic. They do not make good content because they do not feel good when they're happening. They feel, in most cases, like the opposite of progress, like failure, like confusion, like being further behind than your peers in ways you can't fully explain. And the cruelest part is this: the people who are genuinely on the path, the ones who will look back in 10 years and identify this period as the foundation of everything, those people right now do not feel like they're on the path. They feel like they're behind. They feel like they're missing something obvious that everyone else seems to have. They feel like the path is somewhere nearby, but they cannot find the entrance. If that description landed somewhere specific in your chest, not as a concept, but as a recognition, then stay with this. Because what you're about to hear is not a list of flattering signs designed to make you feel chosen. It's a precise description of a process that is already happening to you. And by the end of this, the question won't be whether you're on the path. The question will be whether you've been paying attention to what the path has been trying to tell you. Before you can recognize the real signs, you have to understand what the path to wealth actually is. And the version you've been given is wrong. Not slightly off structurally, foundationally wrong in a way that explains why so many people who do everything right still end up exactly where they started. The version most people carry looks like this. Wealth is a destination, success is an arrival point, and the path is a sequence of correct action, the right habits, the right skills, the right network, the right timing that, accumulated with sufficient discipline, eventually deliver you to the destination. Under that model, progress is visible. You can track it, you can measure it, you can compare your current position to where you were last month and assess whether you are moving in the right direction at the right speed. And under that model, the signs that you're on the path are external. Results? Momentum. Metrics trending upward. Evidence that the correct actions are producing the correct outcomes. This model is not just incomplete, it is a trap, because it conditions you to read your own development through the lens of external validation. And external validation, in the early stages of genuine wealth building, is almost entirely absent. The period before the results appear, the period most people are in right now, produces almost no external signal that the right things are happening. Which means that if you are reading the path correctly, you will perpetually feel like you are off it. Napoleon Hill spent 2 decades studying not just what wealthy people did, but what they went through. The texture of the building period. The internal experience of someone in the process of becoming something they had not yet become. And what he found was not what the self-improvement industry has turned his work into. He found that the path to wealth is not a path at all in the way we use the word. It is a forge. And a forge does not look like progress while you are inside it. It looks like heat and pressure and the application of force to something that must change its fundamental composition before it becomes what it needs to be. The signs that you are in the forge are not signs of arrival. They are signs of transformation. And transformation at the structural level does not feel like winning. It feels like being broken down. Not destroyed, broken down. There is a difference that matters enormously, and understanding that difference is the first thing no one tells you about the path. The first sign is the one that will either relieve you or disturb you, depending on where you are right now. You have recently lost something you thought you needed, not in the abstract, specifically. A belief about how this was going to work, a plan that made sense 3 months ago that no longer makes sense now. A certainty you were carrying about your direction that has developed cracks you cannot repair by thinking harder. And you have been treating that loss as evidence of regression, as a signal that something went wrong, as a reason to doubt the whole enterprise. Hill documented this experience in nearly every significant achiever he studied. He called it the period of burning bridges, not in the dramatic sense of cutting off old relationships, though sometimes that happened too. In the deeper sense of the mind releasing plans and certainties that had kept it feeling safe but were actually keeping it small. The forge has a specific job in its early stages. It has to burn off what is not you before it can reveal what is. And what is not you includes the goals you inherited from your environment, the definitions of success you absorbed from people who were themselves shaped by their own inherited limitations, the identity structures you built to manage other people's expectations of you, and the comfort-based logic that made certain choices feel safe when they were actually just familiar. All of that has to go before the actual you, the organized, purposeful, accurately directed version of you, can emerge and hold its shape. And the burning does not feel like liberation when it is happening. It feels like loss. If you have recently felt an inexplicable grief about a direction you're leaving, a version of yourself you're outgrowing, a set of certainties you can no longer hold with confidence, that is not a warning sign. That is the forge beginning to work on the material that needed to change. The question is not whether you can stop it. The question is whether you are willing to let it complete. Here is something about you that you have probably not said out loud to anyone. You are not sure anymore whether what you're chasing is actually what you want. Not the surface version of it. That part is still clear enough. The financial freedom, the autonomy, the ability to build something real, the end of the particular kind of stress you are currently living inside, those things you still want. You haven't lost the desire. What you've lost is the certainty about whether the specific path you chose is the right one, whether the industry, the model, the approach, the version of success you've been building toward is actually yours, or whether it was the best-looking option available at the time you started choosing. And that uncertainty has started to feel like a problem, like a sign that you are losing focus, losing commitment, losing the belief that has to be present for success to be possible. Here is what makes this specific internal experience so difficult to navigate. Both things are true simultaneously. The uncertainty is real and it is appropriate. It is your mind updating its map as you gather real information about the territory. And the commitment is also real, and it also needs to be held. But the commitment needs to shift from commitment to a specific plan to commitment to the underlying purpose, because the plan was always just one possible expression of the purpose. And you may have outgrown that expression without yet being able to see the next one clearly. The person reading this at 2 a.m. knows exactly what this feels like. The specific flavor of lying awake, not with anxiety about failing, but with something closer to grief about whether you're even building the right thing, whether the sacrifice is pointed in the right direction, whether the version of success you're exhausting yourself to reach is actually yours, or whether you absorbed it from a culture that had reasons to want you chasing it. This is the loop you have been inside. Hope that this is the right direction, followed by effort, followed by a result that feels like progress, until you examine it closely enough to notice that it moved you forward on a metric you're no longer certain you care about. And then the collapse not of energy, but of coherence. The sense that you are building something but you cannot tell what it is becoming. And then the restart. A new framework, a new strategy, a new angle that reinvigorates the effort. Because the effort is not the problem. You have never lacked effort. What you've lacked is the fixed point that effort should be organized around. And here is the deepest layer of the trap. Every time you restart with a new approach, you tell yourself that this time the clarity will come first, and then the effort will follow. You are waiting for certainty as a precondition for commitment. But certainty about the real thing, about who you actually are and what you are actually for, does not come before the work of becoming. It emerges through it. You cannot think your way to the identity that produces clarity. You have to act your way there. And all the new frameworks, all the better strategies, all the more optimized approaches are actually serving the same function. They are giving you something to do while you avoid the deeper confrontation that the path requires. Not the confrontation with the market, or the competition, or the skill gap. The confrontation with the question of who you actually are beneath the plans. Let's be honest about what has been offered as the solution to everything described above. You were told the answer is clarity. Get specific about your goals. Reverse engineer from the outcome. Know your numbers. Know your target. Know your one thing. And the advice is not useless clarity about direction matters. But when every productivity guru hands you a clarity framework, they are assuming the thing the framework cannot give you. They are assuming you already know who the goal setter is. That the identity beneath the goal is already formed and stable and organized, and if it is not, the clarity framework produces a very specific and very expensive problem. It makes you highly efficient at moving in a direction you haven't yet confirmed is yours. You can execute a plan perfectly and arrive at the wrong destination with extraordinary precision. Then you were told the answer is your environment. Change who you're around. Elevate your circle. Find the people who are where you want to be and absorb their habits and beliefs by proximity. And again, the environment matters enormously. Hill was explicit about this. But the version being sold to you skips the part where you have to become someone that a higher caliber environment can actually receive. You can enter a room full of successful people and emerge with nothing if you are not yet the person who can metabolize what that room contains. Access is not development. Proximity is not transformation. Then you were told the answer is belief. Believe you can, and you're halfway there. Fix your money mindset, do the inner work. Release your limiting beliefs about wealth and abundance. And there is a genuine mechanism here that Hill understood and documented carefully. But the version available on most platforms has been stripped of its operational component. It has been turned into a feeling to generate, rather than a practice to execute. And the difference between those two things is the difference between someone who feels wealthy in their meditations and someone who actually builds wealth in reality. Each of these solutions shares the same elegant fatal flaw. They address the performance of the path rather than the process of it. They make you better at looking like someone on the path without changing the foundational thing the path is actually trying to change. And you know this. Not as a concept you just encountered. You have known it for a while. You have felt the gap between the framework and the reality. Between who you appear to be building toward and what you actually feel like on the inside of the building. The anger in you, if it's there, and it might be, is not irrational. It is the appropriate response of someone who has done the work that was asked and still feels the distance. Someone who has paid the price of the advice and not received what the advice promised. Hold that anger carefully, because it is pointing somewhere important, and what it's pointing at is not the next better strategy. Hill documented a pattern so consistent across the people he studied that he eventually concluded it was not coincidental, it was structural. Every person who built real, durable, generational wealth, not the people who got lucky, Not the people who won a single high-stakes bet, but the people who built something that compounded over time. Every single one of them passed through a specific internal threshold that had nothing to do with strategy, timing, market conditions, or skill level. They passed through the moment where they stopped building toward the life and started building from the identity. The distinction sounds small. It is enormous. Building toward the life means your actions are organized around an external destination. Every decision is evaluated against the question, does this get me closer to the thing I'm trying to have? And the problem with that orientation is that it makes the thing you're trying to have the source of your motivation, your belief, your sense of self-worth, which means that when the thing is delayed, which it always is, longer than expected, in ways that cannot be planned, for the motivation, the belief, and the self-worth go with it. Building from the identity means your actions are organized around what you understand yourself to be, not what you're trying to become, what you have decided you are. And the decision precedes the evidence. It has to precede the evidence, because the evidence, in every case Hill studied without exception, followed the identity rather than confirming it in advance. The people who are actually on the path to wealth, the real path, not the performance of it, are in the process of making this shift. And the shift does not feel like clarity or momentum or confidence. It feels like the most uncomfortable thing a human being can do. It feels like deciding who you are before you have any proof that you're right. Tell me in the comments, what's the one identity you keep almost claiming but then pulling back from? Not a goal, an identity. The one that feels like a lie every time you try to say it out loud. Be honest. The first sign that you are genuinely on the path is what Hill called the pressure of purpose, and it is almost universally misread as anxiety. You know the feeling. It is not the sharp anxiety of an immediate threat. It is something lower and more persistent. A background pressure that does not respond to resolution. You solve one problem, and it is still there. You cross one milestone, and it is still there. You rest for a week, and it is still there. And you have probably been trying to manage it, medicate it, or explain it away as stress or burnout or the need for better work-life balance. What it actually is, in the people Hill studied, is the signal of a purpose that is larger than the container currently holding it. It is the feeling of someone whose capacity has outgrown their current expression of it. And it is uncomfortable precisely because it is accurate. Because you are in fact too large for where you currently are. Not in an arrogant sense, in the structural sense that a plant whose roots have exceeded their pot experiences, the pressure is not a malfunction. It is information. Why most people misread this is that the culture has trained them to treat persistent discomfort as a problem to be solved. And so they try to solve it with better habits, better boundaries, better systems, better rest. And the discomfort reduces temporarily because they've addressed the surface manifestations of it. But it returns, because it was never about those surface things. What this feels like when you stop fighting it and start reading it correctly is a shift from the question of how do I make this feeling stop to what is this feeling pointing at? And the answer, when you sit with it honestly, is usually visible within seconds. The purpose that is larger than your current container. The work you have been preparing for and postponing. The expression of your capacity that you have been delaying until the conditions feel safer. The mental shift available now is this. The pressure is not evidence that something is wrong. It is evidence that something is ready. And the question is not how to relieve it. The question is what would happen if you stopped treating it as a problem and started treating it as a compass. The second sign is one that almost no one talks about because it contradicts everything the self-improvement industry says about confidence. You have become more uncertain, not less, as you have learned more. The arc most people expect is more knowledge produces more certainty, produces more confidence, produces better results. And in the early stages of learning anything, that arc is accurate. When you know nothing, any knowledge reduces chaos. The first framework, the first mentor, the first set of strategies, they produce a genuine and appropriate increase in confidence because they are organizing what was previously unorganized. But the people Hill studied who went furthest through this process described a second arc that the self-improvement industry almost never addresses. Beyond a certain level of genuine competence, more knowledge begins to reveal more complexity rather than less. The picture gets larger. The variables multiply. The certainty that the beginner level produced starts to dissolve as the intermediate level shows you how much the beginner level was simplifying. And the person who is genuinely on the path to building something real will at some point find themselves less certain about the path than they were when they started, less certain about the strategy, more aware of what they do not know, more humble about what the journey requires. And that increased uncertainty in a culture that sells confidence as the solution to every problem feels like regression. It is not regression. It is the signal of genuine depth. The shallow end of any pool feels stable because your feet touch the ground. When you enter water deep enough that your feet no longer reach, the first experience is not freedom. It is the particular fear of depth. And the person who has only ever stood in the shallow end will tell you that the fear means you've gone the wrong direction. The person who has learned to swim knows differently. The mental shift is this. Stop measuring your progress by the solidity of your certainty. Start measuring it by the quality of your questions. Shallow certainty produces simple questions with clean answers. Deep engagement produces complex questions that resist simple answers but open into territory that simple answers could never reach. The third sign is the relationship change that happened without you fully choosing it. Not a dramatic ending, not a confrontation, a quiet distancing. The people you used to spend time with effortlessly have started to feel like they require more energy than they return. Conversations that used to feel natural now feel like they are happening at a frequency that no longer matches yours. Not because you are better than them, that framing misses the point entirely. Because you are different from who you were when those connections formed. And the version of you that formed those connections is not the version of you that is being built now. Hill was precise about this and also careful about it. He did not say that building wealth requires abandoning people you love. He said it requires honesty about the relational environments that are serving your development, and the ones that are subtly, without malice, maintaining you in a version of yourself you are trying to outgrow. The maintenance happens not through criticism, but through familiarity, through the shared history that defines who you are to each other, through the unspoken agreement that says, you are this and I am that, and this is what we do together. And that agreement, forged over years, is not easily renegotiated. It does not update automatically to accommodate the person you are becoming. It applies the gentle, constant pressure of the familiar toward the shape it has always known. What this feels like in real life is a loneliness that you cannot fully explain to anyone because the people you would explain it to are the people it is about. You are not lonely because you lack connection. You are lonely because the connections you have do not yet meet you where you are going. And where you are going has not yet produced the relationships that will. This is one of the least discussed costs of genuine development. And it is real. Acknowledging it is not self-pity. It is accurate thinking. The mental shift is this. The loneliness is not a sign that you are losing. It is a sign that you are between. Between the version of yourself the old connections knew and the version that the new ones will recognize. The between is not a failure state. It is a transit state. And transit states, by definition, are temporary. The fourth sign will be the most uncomfortable one to hear. You have started doing the work even on the days when you have completely stopped believing it will amount to anything. Not through discipline, not through habit, not because a system is keeping you accountable, Because something below the level of belief, something that operates at the level of identity rather than motivation, has started to move you independent of how you feel about it on any given day. This is the sign Hill was most interested in, the one he returned to most consistently across everything he wrote and observed. Because motivation is available to everyone in the early stages of any endeavor. Belief is easy when the results are fresh and the momentum is visible. The question that separates the people who arrive from the people who stop somewhere along the road is what keeps them moving when neither the motivation nor the belief is present. And the answer, in every case he documented without exception, was that something had shifted in the identity. The work had stopped being something they were doing and had become something they were. And you cannot stop being something the way you can stop doing something. The identity continues producing the behavior even when the emotional support for the behavior has temporarily collapsed. You have felt this. A day or a week or a season where you continued moving not because you felt good about it or believed in it, but because stopping felt more foreign than continuing. Where the action came from somewhere below the level of your current emotional state. Where the effort was not produced by willpower but by something that had already decided. That is not hustle. That is not grind. That is not the performance of discipline. That is the early signature of an identity that has begun to genuinely shift. And it is one of the most significant signs available to a human being that the forge is doing its actual work. The mental shift is this. On the days when the belief is absent, pay attention to what you are still doing. Because what you continue doing without belief is what you have actually become. Not aspirationally, operationally. And operational identity, once formed, is the foundation that everything else gets built on. The fifth sign is the one that requires the most honesty to recognize because it looks from the outside like a problem. You have started making decisions that your current circumstances do not justify. Not reckless decisions, not financially irresponsible ones. Decisions about how you carry yourself, how you communicate, what you will and will not accept, what you say yes to and what you decline, how you show up in rooms where your current output would not yet justify the level of presence you're bringing. Hill observed this in the early stages of almost every significant builder he documented. A point where the person began operating from a future self rather than a current one. Where the decisions were being made not by the person the evidence would confirm, but by the person the identity had committed to becoming. This is not delusion. It is not arrogance. It is the specific, operational mechanism by which identity transformation precedes result transformation. You cannot produce the results of a different person while fully inhabiting your current one. At some point, the inhabiting has to shift, and the shift almost always looks from the outside like someone getting ahead of themselves. But here is what Hill understood that the outside observers didn't. The people who build real wealth are always in their building period ahead of their evidence. They are always carrying an identity that their current results have not yet confirmed. And the ones who wait for the evidence before claiming the identity never build the evidence, because the evidence follows the identity, without exception, without shortcut. The mental shift is this. Stop waiting to feel like the person. Start making the decisions the person would make, not in every domain simultaneously that produces incoherence. In one specific domain, starting now. The domain where the gap between who you are and who you are becoming is most visible. Make one decision today from the identity, not the circumstances. And notice what it costs, because the cost of that decision is the exact price of the path, and being willing to pay it repeatedly is the fifth and final sign that you are genuinely on it. You are going to resist this now. Not everything about it, enough of it. The part you will resist most is the fifth sign, because it is the one that requires the most from you right now, in the circumstances that actually exist, not the better circumstances you are waiting for. And the resistance will not feel like resistance. It will feel like prudence. It will feel like the appropriate caution of someone who has learned, through genuine experience, not to overextend. The old self does not make a dramatic final stand. It does not announce itself. It simply generates a very convincing argument for why this specific moment is not the right moment to fully commit. Why you need a little more time, a little more preparation, a little more evidence that the shift is working before you make it completely. And you will recognize this argument because you have heard it before. You have been hearing it at every threshold for as long as you can remember. It speaks in the language of wisdom. It references your real history. It makes the case for caution using evidence that is technically accurate. What it does not tell you is that there will never be a moment when the caution is not justified by something. There will never be a clean window, a perfect set of circumstances, a period of your life where all the variables align in a way that removes the argument for waiting. The argument will always have material to work with, because the material it requires is uncertainty, and uncertainty is permanent. The only variable you actually control is what you decide to do inside the uncertainty. Here is what the people who make it through this period look like from the inside. They are not fearless. They are afraid in ways that are specific and accurate. They are not certain. They carry uncertainty as a permanent companion. They are not free from doubt. The doubt is there, often loud. The difference is that they have stopped using the presence of fear as a reason to delay the decision. They have moved the question from, should I be afraid? And the answer is, yes. The fear is appropriate to, what do I do while I am afraid? And the answer to that question, for them, is always the same. You continue. Not loudly, not with the performance of courage, quietly, specifically, in the direction the identity requires, one decision at a time. The path does not reward the person who feels ready. It cannot, because readiness is built by the path, not delivered before it. The path rewards the person who moves without waiting for readiness. And every sign described in this video, the pressure, the deepening uncertainty, the shifting relationships, the action beneath belief, the decisions ahead of evidence, every single one of them is visible in you. Right now, if you have the honesty to look, you are not waiting to find the path. You have been on it. You have been on it through everything that felt like failure, through everything that felt like delay, through every version of the loop and every season of the forge. The question was never whether you were on it. The question is whether you are finally going to stop treating it like something that hasn't started yet. It started long before you were ready, and it will not wait for you to feel like it did. If you're done waiting for a sign that you're on the path, you just read 9 of them. You know what to decide. And if this is where your mind has been trying to get to, you know what to do.